How Earth's mantle plumes were formed by comet and asteroid impacts from the late heavy bombardment about 4 billion years ago. And here we're going to be coming up to the mantle plume, or the pillar, that's under Iceland as an example. As you can see right here, the mantle plume under Iceland. And we know Iceland has a number of volcanoes. And that's a plume or a pillar. Pillar is what it's called in the Holy Bible. And these are various mantle plumes that you have. We have one under Yellowstone. We have number 1 and 3 over Canada, 4 over Greenland, 5 over Scandinavia, 15 over Brazil, as you can see there. So this is from the late heavy bombardment. If you'll see a couple of videos back, we started the late heavy bombardment, and also the fact that we had the perturbations of planets moving out because of Planet 5 impacts and comets that were quite big, asteroids and comets that were quite big. And going into the explanation of the mantle plumes. What happened on the Earth at that time? We have to keep in mind that the explosion of the planet happened very quickly. The phenomenon leading to the explanation of what really happened with the splitting comets, Van Flanders' hypothesis said that a comet which has some small bodies associated with it gravitationally approaches the sun, enough mass melts off for the parent body to lose some of its gravitational pull, allowing the associated smaller bodies to drop away. This brings us back to the late heavy bombardment, LHB. The planet beyond Neptune that exploded sent thousands upon thousands of its pieces careening in towards the inner solar system, as well as out into space. Some did remain in orbits, some became comets, some were captured as moons by the larger planets as they passed, and a great number simply smashed into the inner planets, their moons, and the existing moons of the larger planets. Those that hit the larger planets would leave no trace because of the gas composition of the planets. And some of the late heavy bombardments, which have not been too badly erased by later impacts or electrical events, the Maria on the Moon, the low areas on Mars, the early craters on Mercury, and even on Jupiter's moon, Ganymede, are some of the older craters that are attributed to the late heavy bombardment. Now, what happened on Earth at that time? We have to keep in mind that explosions of the planet happened very quickly after creation itself. Atomic processes were much, much faster at that time, and so radioactive heating occurred rapidly. The planet did not exist for long. It may have exploded a matter of weeks after creation or up to a year or two after. The shattered pieces, however, needed time to reach the inner solar system. Earth was probably hit about the time of Jared in Genesis, just before the birth of Enoch. This was about 1,250 years after creation, just about the amount of time that would be needed for material from beyond Neptune to impact the inner planets. So while the Earth's land itself rose on day 3 of creation, the effects of the late heavy bombardment were not felt for a little over 1,000 years later. The impacts which hit the Earth may well have hit on the ocean side. There was only one continent at the time, Pangaea, remember, and which would have blunted their force somewhat. The oceans, that is. But the force of the impact was still enough to cause the rising of great plumes of magma under the land, which then partially hardened. And we call these magma plumes, which are under the continents today, cratons. The Bible refers to them as pillars. An artist's reconstruction of what a pillar under Iceland looks like, we saw before. The placement of other cratons today is shown on the map. We have the number one is Slave in northern Canada, above the Yukon Territory. Number 2 is Wyoming. Number 3 is around Hudson Bay and coming down over the Lake Superior. That's where Lake Superior we have the mid-continental rift mantle plume going all the way from into Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and then swinging west towards New Mexico. We talked about that many times. Number 4 is southern Greenland. 5 is Fennoscandia, which is over Scandinavia. 6 is the Siberian traps over Siberia, Russia, mostly all of Russia. 7 is North China. 8 is Western Australia. 9 is India. 10 is Tarim, which is, I guess we would say sort of Mongolia. 11 is Tanzania on just south of Ethiopia. Tanzania, that would be the Great Rift Valley. South Africa is Cap Val, that's around South Africa, obviously. 13 is Congo, is west, northwest of South Africa. 14 is West Africa, below the Sahara. And 15 is Brazil, Amazonia. Now, there's something fascinating to note about the late heavy bombardment and where it hit on Earth and on our moon. Our moon is in sync with the Earth, as we know, and we always see the same side of it. Before the continents were divided, they were all on one side of the world as a single landmass, Pangaea. When that massive amount of hits occurred, for the cratons to be formed, the Earth had to be hit on the ocean side, sending the shock waves through the Earth. The moon got hit on the side that we see. There are no Maria on the other side of the moon. This means that anyone on Earth would have seen the moon being hit, because the face of the moon facing us is what has all those craters. So people, if there were whoever or whatever living being was on Earth, would have been seeing the moon being hit. So this means that anyone on Earth would have seen the moon being hit. Interestingly, we have some ancient stories that talk about rocks being thrown at the moon and the moon then changing its face. The most graphic of these stories comes out of the South Pacific Islands. But remember that everyone was on the one continent when it happened, Pangaea. It was not a matter of people in the South Pacific seeing it, but of people who lived there after remembering the story. So Pangaea. And we know that the time the earth split was at the time of Peleg of the Old Testament telling us. We even have ancient Greeks telling us of the time of the pre-Selenites. They were people that lived before we had a moon. So where did the moon come from? So very strange legends as of what was going on with the celestial changes in our solar system. Now, when we consider the number of impact sites from the late heavy bombardment that we see on Mercury, our moon, and Mars, and other places still, and we realize how far those pieces had to come and how spread out they must have been, the only conclusion possible is that the planet that was once, for a short time, beyond Neptune was extremely large. There is one other thought which comes from Van Flandern regarding comets. Quote, "Only very recent explosions can produce comets that would remain visible today," he said. And he was not a young Earth creationist. Internal heating of the planets. Because of Mark-Lund convection, the cores of each planet were undergoing heating from the radiodecay of their heavy elements. The four gas giants did not have too much of a problem for two reasons. First, because their relative cores are so small compared to the entire planet. And second, each of them had, and still has, very thick layers of gases surrounding them, which buffers any explosive tendencies. Things were a little different in the inner solar system. Mercury did not have a problem because it contained no water in its rocks. Oxygen and hydrogen, being much more plentiful farther out, were not there. This, plus its small size, allowed Mercury to simply give off any excess heat in its early life. There have been a little expansion and cracking, and what we also see is evidence of subsequent contraction in the form of what is called lobate scarps. Venus, Earth, and Mars were developing potential catastrophes, though. All three planets were having water driven out of their mantle rocks, which was then starting to force its way to the surface. And interesting, the Bible indicates this was as early as day 3, when it mentions that water was coming up from under the ground to water the earth. What does not go up if it's not under pressure? Water does not go up if it's not under pressure. So it was being pressured, and pressure means heat. A few days later, by the time of the Garden of Eden, enough water was coming up in that one area to form the headwaters of 4 major river systems. Still, these 3 planets were holding. There was another planet and its moon, however, between Mars and Jupiter, which was not so fortunate. Both this planet and its moon exploded, but at different times. The first explosion was of the mantle of the planet, the second of its core, and later its moon also exploded. Like its big brother out past Neptune that had exploded a couple of thousand years earlier, this planet sent its pieces scattering in all directions. 2 of them were captured by Mars and became its moons, little rocks that don't look like moons at all. A number of its pieces were captured by Jupiter and became some of its moons. And more ended up strung out on Jupiter's orbit and became what we call the Trojan asteroids. The asteroid belt and the 3 asteroid groups that are separate from it are also from these explosions. There's a reason the asteroid planet blew up, but Mars, Earth, and Venus did not blow up. To find the reasons, we have to go back to the Markland convection. In the same way different elements were sorted in the formation of individual planets, they were also sorted in terms of entire solar system. Venus had some water, Earth has more, Mars, being smaller, had a lesser amount but plenty in terms of its percentage. The peak of the hydrogen-oxygen mix, which forms water, was at the point where the asteroid planet was. We know from bits and pieces of it which have hit Earth that it contained less than 20% water in its mantle. Compare that with the probability that Earth's mantle would not have contained more than 5% water in its youth. It's still about 2% water, which is enough to fill the oceans again. And now, why didn't the asteroid planet explode all at once? The answer lies in the chemical composition of the mantle. First of all, asteroids from the part of the planet are the stony meteorites when they land on Earth and show an excess of magnesium-26. Magnesium-26 is radiogenic, which means that it is the end product of the radio decay of aluminum-26. Alumina ions are right-sized to be trapped in the silicate lattices and are often found in silicates on Earth. And because aluminum-26 has a very short half-life, the decay process was fast, therefore the heating was rapid. The Cambridge Atlas of Astronomy states heat from short-period radioactive elements such as aluminum-26 would be sufficient to melt bodies of size greater than 10 kilometers, which is about 6.25 miles, because the meteorites from the mantle have up to 20% water in them, and we know the mantle did as well. The mantle was heating quickly, the water was being driven out, and the rocks were expanding, and then the mantle blew. The pieces of the exploded mantle also hit our moon and Mercury as well, leaving impact craters there. And this is a part of Astronomy Explanations and Interpretations of Setterfield, and I'll leave a link below for you. You can read there's much more information there if you want more explanations of this. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.